Hello and welcome to today's online global webinar from IBT Online, and we're delighted that you could all join us. Today we're going to be talking about how to use your website to grow your sales, your brand, your business in India, and we're delighted that you could all join us today. Just while the last remaining attendees are logging on, we're going to do a little tiny bit of housekeeping before we get stuck in and talk about exporting to India and how to use your website to grow your sales in India. So just a brief word then on housekeeping. Today's webinar is going to be about 45 minutes long. We have left some time at the end for questions, and we would really welcome your questions. Just pop them into the chat box, and we'll curate them and answer them at the end of the webinar. There will be also 3 polls during the webinar, and we'd really appreciate your participation in those polls, just to get some feedback during the webinar about sort of where you are on exporting to India and then how interested you are and things like that. There will also be a handout of an infographic on India Online, and you can grab that from the screen later on in the webinar. The entire webinar will be recorded and be sent to you at the end of this week. On Friday, so check out your inbox. Sometimes it goes to spam. If you're listening, if you want to have the recording of it. And finally, I would really appreciate it. At the end of this webinar, there is a very brief survey. There are 5 yes and no questions, and we would really appreciate it if you could just stick around, just help us, just to make sure that we're on trend and that we're talking about the things that interest you most. It helps us develop new webinars for you all. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming today to talk about using your website to grow your sales, your brand, your business, your exports to India. Let's introduce ourselves first of all. So my name is Susanna Hardy, and I'm Chief Content Officer at IBT Online. I've been with IBT now for over 10 years, and I guess my role has developed a little bit or changed a little bit over time as the role of content has increased and the need for content curation. So I'm responsible for the content both of our clients and for our own website and webinars. And I'm really delighted to have Joelle Mazzaroto joining me today. Joelle heads up our online marketing team. She's our Senior Online Marketing Manager. Joelle and her team are responsible for all of our online marketing, including a lot that goes on in India. So I was really delighted that she could join us to talk about her insights on engaging with prospects and generating leads through online marketing. And she'll be doing quite an in-depth study on that later on in the webinar. Just briefly, the company, who we are, IBT Online. We're actually a US company. We have a UK subsidiary where I'm sitting today, and we've been around since 2002. We are 100% focused on online tools for international companies. So we build and manage corporate websites and online marketing for international target markets. We work with several US states, delivering online global programs, and have clients from the US, the UK, Australia, everywhere else as well. And we're delighted that you would all join us today. So with that being said, their introduction being said, let's now start talking about the India business landscape. So Joelle and I decided to cut this up into the webinar today, to cut it up into 5 segments. Giving you a brief overview of the business landscape of India, then a little bit more sort of very much a sort of top level down of India Online. What's the current status of India Online today? What are websites looking like? And then drill down a little bit more into what we would call a buyer persona. So your prospective lead, your prospective target clients, and how you identify them, and what their online journey is likely to be in India. And then Joelle's going to talk about how you can really engage with that audience and those prospective buyers. And then finally, we have takeaways, and as I said earlier, some questions from you, we hope. And as I said, put the questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them later. So now let's start talking then about the India business landscape. So first of all, a couple of the basics. You know, India is vast. Obviously, it is the second largest population in the world at 1.3 billion. It's actually doubled in population since about sort of 1970 or something. It's also the seventh largest country in the world. It's actually smaller than I thought it was. It's about a third the size of the United States in terms of landmass, which I thought was interesting. It's the sixth for total GDP and the eighth for per capita income. And again, I'm going to drill down into that because those surprised me too, especially the one about the per capita income. We'll talk about that. But it's also the single largest democracy in the world, and I think that's worth flagging up and talking about. There's a little snippet from an infographic on the left-hand side of your screen, which is an infographic that we produced, and you can, which is available through this webinar, and it's really an India online environment infographic, which just lists the key highlights of the online world. And there you have some comparisons between India and the United States. One of the key things we wanted to highlight on the sort of business landscape really is diversity. This gets really important when you start doing websites. So India is just an absolute mosaic of peoples, of languages, of ethnic groups, of cultures. So there are in total 28 Indian states and then 8 more union territories, as they're called. Officially, India has 22 main languages. Those are official languages, including English. So on the map that you have on the left, there are 14 of them, the 14 largest that are mentioned. You'll see the big green one on the top is really Hindi. That's the top, the north, you know, if you divide India in half, that's the northern half of India. But even there, there's an endless, you know, amount of dialects and regional patois as well, and local languages. I think one of the things I wanted to point out with this is that when you're making websites, if you think, oh, well, everyone in India speaks English. For most people, English is their second or third language. And again, this becomes important when you're looking at websites for this. The next feature that I wanted to highlight as well is really about demographics. And this is pretty stunning. It just shows you, one, the population explosion that's happened in India over the last 50 years. It looks like it will surpass China in the next sort of 2 or 3 years, and then start to taper off, most of the people think, and actually slightly decline. But what's really amazing is what's called the demographic dividend. You always hear a lot of economists talking about that, the demographic dividend for India. And that is because 65% of India's population is below the age of 35. So India's demographic is one of the youngest nations in the world for that. So it's, I mean, there are challenges for that, but from our perspective in terms of website development, online marketing, one of the points about that is that India is a pretty techie place, and we'll see how that's developing and where that's going, and how that means a sort of a very mobile first generation that's coming up on stream. Now, the next little slide just highlights some of what are called the growth drivers. And this is something, if you've been looking at India for a while and doing some business in India, I'm sure that you'll come across this. These growth drivers they really come down to a single argument, which is that there's this growing middle class in India. And you can see those bar charts on the left-hand side of your screen. This comes from the OECD report about emerging middle classes. And the top color, green, is India. So it goes from less than 1% in 2009, just 10 years ago, to something like 11% of the population of India today, and so on, and growing and projected to grow further. So this growing sort of mass of middle class people is supposed to be fueling and promoting a very dynamic consumer market, as well as changes in lifestyle, and therefore in spend, and some pretty innovative private services and service providers. I mean, you know, Uber, for example, is all over India, but Ola Cabs, that's actually an Indian company. So there's a local, very, very strong competitor to Uber as well. So, that's a private cab company. And then there's lots and lots of e-commerce as well. Flipkart, well, that's now been bought by Walmart, but there's lots of very innovative e-commerce and payment systems. So that's sort of the key, that's the kernel of the growth and bullish case for India longer term, is this growing middle class and this demographic dividend, as it's called. I thought it would be also, we're not economists as such. We are specialists in the online world. But I think these are arguments that one sees quite often from economists. I would just like to temper some of that and just say, short term, there have also been some, what I would call some little clouds on the horizon. India was very hard hit by the 2008-2009 economic recession. And then coming out of it, I think, sort of 3-4 years ago, the government decided to do two things at the same time: demonetization, where they wanted to strip out a lot of the excess cash economy and the cash floating around the system, particularly take out all those very small little notes. And at the same time, they also wanted to change what's called a GST, which is a goods and service tax, to try and standardize the goods and service tax across India, because at the time it was very regionally varied. Those two things came pretty well at the same time and caused a lot of chaos. It appears also to have driven quite a few very small businesses out of business, and really hit the informal sector very hard. So some short-term clouds there, sort of 2008, 2019, as you can see from the chart on the right-hand side. But longer term, I guess, still a very sort of attractive market. Just highlighting and sort of synthesizing in one slide what we think are some of what our company clients see as their challenges and their opportunities. Young population is clearly there. Rapid internet adoption is also there, and we'll talk about that. Some of the challenges, though, I think that the two that are continuously mentioned by our clients is the sort of the bureaucracy and also the regional variations between things. So it becomes very important to decide where you're actually going to be based. I mean, even tax is different according to which state you're in, for example. And for us, one of the challenges is an underdeveloped infrastructure, including an infrastructure on the web. So there are issues about sort of download and upload speeds, that part of the infrastructure, and obviously the problems of overcrowding. Roads and rail are well documented. So there you go, in a very brief sort of big landscape picture overview of the business world of India environment. Now let's dig down more into the part where we're more have the expertise, which is really India Online. Now we're very grateful for Hootsuite and We Are Social for producing some fantastic slides, some fantastic data on India Online. This is fresh off the press, as it were, January 2020. So we talked about 1.3 billion people. Well, 50% of them, 687 million people, use the internet in India. That's what twice, more than twice the population of the United States using the internet in one country. This grew by 23%. That means 128 million people went online for the first time during 2019 in India. And the other statistic which I wanted to highlight was the average time that they spent on the internet. The average time that each person spent on the internet is 6.5 hours a day. So that's a pretty strong statistic here. So when we talk about India being plugged in, nearly 700 million people on the internet, growing at 20%, 23% in 2019, spending a good chunk of their day on the internet. One of the highlights one of the things we wanted to highlight, characteristics we wanted to highlight, was how mobile it is. there are something like 1 billion mobile connections in India in January 2020. It actually dipped down a tiny bit, but as you can see, it's 92% of the people who are mobile internet users as a total internet used on the internet. So of the nearly 700 million people on the internet, 92% are using their phones. So that's quite something. That's equivalent to something like, if you look at the number of mobile connections in India, it's about 78% of the total population. I'll give you some indication of how important it is to make sure your websites are really mobile friendly. And again, about half of that, we talked about 6 hours, over 6 hours on the internet. Well, about half of that time is spent using the internet on mobile devices. So about half the time that you spend on the internet is via your telephone in India. So that's, again, going to be a very strong thing when you look at websites. I wanted to show this slide as well. People in the internet world talk a lot about sort of, where's the next growth going to come from? And it's very clear that, we out of, as I said, 7.4 billion people on the planet, something like 450 million of them, 450 billion of them, sorry, are on the internet already. So where's the next growth going to come? Where's the next billion going to come? And it's clear most of that, the biggest single chunk, is going to come from India. And this is the reason, China's so dominated by the Chinese players that India is really the battleground, as it were, between Amazon and Alibaba, between Baidu and Google. So you'll see all the big internet giants in the world clustering around India, battling for market share, taking acquisitions in a very aggressive way. And that's quite important as well, because there are different strategies there, but you can find them all, and you'll see this later in the social media thing as well. So I wanted to highlight that. Just quickly talking about social media, and again, Joelle will dive down in more. Just a quick number. We talked about 687 million people on the internet, 400 million social media users in India in January 2020. The number of people on social media increased by 48%. That's 130 million people last year. So we talked about a 29% increase in the number of internet users, a 48% increase in social media take-up, and the total level of social media penetration in all of India, about 29%. So again, social media becomes incredibly important. It is large already, 400 out of those 680 million people, and it's growing, as I said, at 48% per annum. So really a very strong one. And this slide, I think, is really important because you can see here just how important it is to say, social media is not just about sharing pictures of your dogs and your cats. Social media in countries like India is used for work, much more so than in, for example, the UK or the USA. So people in what are called mobile first markets, Mexico, Argentina, India, the Philippines, mobile first markets, they very often discovered the internet, went on the internet via their mobile phones, use social media for work in a very active, proactive way. Therefore, if you're going to get on the web, so on India, if you're targeting India as a market, you need to have some kind of social media strategy to back it up. One quick little email slide just on e-commerce. Just say it's very vibrant. And Indians have taken up e-commerce spend at a phenomenal rate. They are going all out and spending. This is growing at nearly 30% per annum. It is a very, very particular market, though. There are local dominant players who really dominate the landscape. Some of them are now being bought by Walmart, by Amazon, by Alibaba, and so on. But still a very vibrant and active place, but very specific and India specific. So if you're into the e-commerce way, we have done a webinar just on e-commerce if you'd like to drill down that. So that sort of finishes my sort of intro side. We're now going to talk about India buyer persona. But before I get there, I want to launch my first poll just to make sure you're all waking up there. So are you currently doing business in India? Yes, on my own. Yes, with a local partner like a distributor. Yes, on e-commerce, or if you're thinking about it, or if you know. And it's really interesting. Not all of you have responded yet, but the majority of you are now clicking on quickly. So I think, let me give you some feedback. About a third of you are already in India with a local partner, and about slightly changed now. Another third are on your own. And a few of you are still thinking about it, but the majority of you are already doing business in India. Great to know. Very happy with it. And well, it's changed slightly. The majority are in India with a local partner. Thank you very much for that poll, and we will be doing some more polls coming up. Let me go back to now focus on your India buyer persona and what their journey is. So now we're going to get down to really into the sort of the more of the weeds. Let's start off by saying, what is a buyer persona? What are they talking about? What is a buyer persona? A buyer persona is a semi-fictional sort of representation of your ideal prospect. What's your ideal customer? You base that representation on market research and on real data about your existing customers. That way, you make sure that you are targeting and reaching out to the right person at the right time with the right message. This makes you really focus your resources into the right place. I chose this example. It has nothing to do with India, but I chose it as one of the best examples I know of a company who really targets its buyer persona, so much so that they even put their buyer persona in their mission statement. So it includes who their main target market, their buyer persona is: urban, educated, tech-savvy, environmentally conscious consumers. It's not hard to identify your buyer persona in your domestic market. The key is to understand who your buyer persona is in your export markets. And we'll get on to this. So let's talk about your India buyer persona. The key that you want to figure out is your buyer persona in India the same as your buyer persona sitting back with you in the United States or in Germany or in Japan or wherever it is your core, where you know your buyer persona the best? And is your buyer persona the same throughout all of India? And these aren't difficult things to really figure out. When you think about your buyer persona, you can start thinking about all kinds of things about them. You know, their language, their age, where they live, what they buy. Most importantly, are they the same as in your domestic market? Do they speak English? Or is English their first, their second, or even their third language? Where are they? What age? What education? All of that. And how do you figure this out? You figure it out through very data-driven things like, analyzing your website, your analytics, your KPIs. But you know what? One of the main things to think about in identifying your buyer persona is get your salesmen around a table and then say, who do you think is your top? Who are your top targets, and what are they like? And that'll probably also give you some very good clues. But the key is really for you to start off with in India, and it's particularly for your website, is to figure out who your India buyer persona is. Once you figure out the buyer persona, you start mapping the journey. So the buyer persona's journey. Most importantly, these three questions. How does that prospect find you? How do they understand you? In what way do they understand you? How do they understand you? And three, how do they do business with you? You have to make it as easy as possible for them to do business with you, obviously, but you have to build a certain level of engagement, of trust, and of ease of transaction for them to actually engage and take that step of trust that is so necessary in the buyer's journey. So identifying the buyer persona and mapping the buyer persona's journey is key to identifying the right website for you. And why is this important? It's important because of something called localization. And the best way I have of explaining localization is to talk about search engines. Now, Google is the dominant search engine for India at the moment. Baidu, the Chinese search engine, is making a lot of inroads to that market share, but Google at the moment is still the strongest, and certainly for the English language websites. But Google India is not the same as Google US or Google Germany or whatever. Even if it's in the same language, Google India in English is not the same as Google in England or in the US, because Google is localized. That means it is customer centric. It puts the searcher at the key, at the center of all searches. So if your website is based in Nebraska, your company's based in Nebraska, you've got a Nebraska-based website, and your pages are all in American English, and your reflangs are in English, and your back end of your website is all oriented towards the US market, Google India is not going to think that you're relevant to India. It's as simple as that. So don't think of Google as like this one mastodon across all of the world. Think of Google as lots of regional Googles. And your website needs to engage with Google India. So Google India needs to think that you are relevant. And how do you make something relevant on the web? You make sure that it is customer centric. So both websites and social media have to be localized. And localization means customer centric. Now there's lots of different ways to localize. It's not only about translation, it's about a lot of other things too. And we have a lot of webinars on that. But here I've listed the 10 top requirements to a localized website. So you see it's quite a lot of things involved here, from hosting to design to mobile enabled, multilingual, etc., etc. Domain names, all of that are important to reach out to engage with this Indian population. Before I hand over to Joelle, I'm going to launch my second poll. Thank you for responding to it. Do you have localized websites already for your export markets? Do you have them for all of your export markets? For just a few export markets? No, but you're thinking about it? No, this is news to you. You've never done this before. What are we looking at here? Well, I can tell you that we're still collecting responses, but the majority of you have websites for a few export markets. There's quite a few of you who are planning to have it, and then there's a few who don't have any yet. But interestingly enough, none of you have them for all of your export markets. That's okay, but at least a good chunk of you have them for a few export markets. We're very happy to hear that. And with that, I'm going to close this poll. Thank you for responding to that poll. We're going to close this poll, and I'm going to turn over the mic to Joelle to talk about the online marketing in India. Joelle.
Excellent. Think you very much, Susanna. And hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here today. Thank you, Susanna, for having me to think a little bit about online marketing in India, how to set up your strategy, and just diving into a couple of case studies that we'd like to share with you today. So just getting started, we'd like to, when we're looking at online marketing, first, as we were talking about localized website, localized social media platform, I would like to start from looking at India's social media landscape. So in India, there are many popular social media platforms, and users actually tend to keep on jumping from using one medium to another platform in a very small period of time. And they do actually spend, we've seen they spend about 6.5 hours on the internet. Of that, about 2.5 hours is actually spent on social media each day. And Hootsuite reported that each person has an average of 12 social media accounts across platform. Just imagine the upkeep that takes to engage with all of these profiles, to share and cross-post across all of these different platforms. So 2.5 hours seems fairly realistic. So this just to say, as a starting point, as a background point, that users in India are highly engaged and very active internet, mobile, and social media users. And as we said, they are very active on different social networks, and 88% of users actually share content on the social profile daily. And they're increasingly spending time on a number of these social media platforms here. We can still see that YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp are still the leading platforms in terms of numbers of users. But alongside those global giants, we can see there are a number of platforms that are now gaining popularity. And we can see here there are some brands that we all recognize, but despite YouTube and Facebook and other mainstream social media, as we could define them, still register the highest number of users, we can see some growing social media platforms that I think are quite interesting, and we should all keep an eye on them as they are really rapidly growing. Also, thanks to the fact, as Susanna mentioned, that India has a very young and tech-savvy population. Social media is taking on a lot quicker than it did in the past, and it maybe have done in other markets. So here I just highlighted some interesting platforms. We have China originating TikTok, WeChat, QQ, Tencent, for example, are becoming more popular by the day. And that's really diluting the time the users are spending on each single platform, because they have so many accounts, they keep jumping from one to the other. But there's also increased competitions for marketers, because you will have to be, it's not just Facebook and LinkedIn. You know, if we are looking at a more complex landscape, we'll have to be a bit smarter about how we choose the platform that's relevant for us and how do we manage our time on that. And also India native platform, for example, like Hike and Ibibo, are also gaining popularity amongst the younger audiences and are now gaining tractions in terms of numbers of users. So watch this space. I think there will be a pretty good fight for users' attention and for advertising spend as well over the next few years. Having said that, despite a variety of options available, Facebook still really remains the giant, the top performing platform. So I thought it deserves some further attention today if we talk about digital marketing, online marketing in India. So if you're looking to start using social media platforms to grow your brand in India, I think Facebook is a fairly safe bet as a starting point. So with over 1 billion people logging into Facebook each day across the globe, Facebook is actually now available in 101 languages. But very interestingly, as Susanna mentioned earlier, when talking about search engine, not all Facebooks are the same. So Facebook is also localized. So to ensure that each user is actually receiving the best possible local user experience for them, Facebook will then recognize and prioritize what they feel is more relevant to the specific user in the specific market. So when you think about your social media strategy, always be mindful of who your buyer persona is and how they communicate, how they want to be communicated to when they're online, when they are on social media. Looking at Facebook more specifically in the India landscape, in India alone, Facebook has 260 million active users. So that's the highest they have in any other country. And in terms of number of users per city, Mumbai has actually the highest number of Facebook users, followed by Delhi, another big city like Bangalore and Chennai. I found really interesting a report from Reuters. They reported that 52% of Indians actually use Facebook as a source of news and information, as well as to research products and companies. So if we've seen is Facebook is no longer just a social platform to share content with friends and family. It's become more similar to a professional tool as a search engine, and that's why I think is growingly important, is growing in importance for not just B2C but also B2B marketing strategies. So here again, when designing your marketing strategy, as I mentioned, I think it's always important to understand how your audience behaves online so you can reach them, but also you can set and track relevant metrics, relevant key performance indicators. So in this case, here we can see Facebook activity frequency in India specifically. And we can see how we've mentioned they're very engaged. They will like, they will comment, they will share your post. But interestingly, they will hardly ever like a Facebook page. So to me, this is interesting because when you're starting your strategy, so don't overstress if you're not getting the same number of page likes or followers your US page is getting, but you should then focus on other kind of metrics like posts, reshares, and likes to your Facebook posts or your Facebook ads. So following on from that, just wanted to share a quick case study which is a great example of how Indian users actually do engage with Facebook posts, both promoted content or organic posts alike. So in this case, this example is from Amzul, who have been expanding their reach into the Indian market, focusing on motorcycle market, motorcycle enthusiasts. So as part of the strategy that we designed for the campaign, we publish a new blog article every month targeted to this specific demographic, aimed at reaching and engaging what we call top of the funnel traffic. So users in India that have expressed interest in motorcycle oil, taking care of their bikes, but they might not be familiar with the brand just yet. So what we want to do is to share informative content to engage them on social media and then redirect them back to the website. So the main objectives of this Facebook campaign is to engage the audience, raise brand awareness, and build quality traffic to the blog post and to the website. So here we've seen in terms of engagement and key performance indicator or KPIs, we've looked at likes, comments, and share, but also engagement with other comments, clicks to the blog page, and local distributors page. So this to me was a great example to show how with a small investment of a few dollars a day, we have been able to reach a huge audience, but also the level of engagement that we've achieved in a short period of time. So if you see, each of these posts have received 5,000, 3,000 likes, but also the post has been commented on 112 times and it's been shared 345 times. So this really speaks volume on the level of engagement, the deep level of engagement and brand recall that Facebook can yield for you in this specific market. And you see the comments, most of them are then they engage, they like, they comment to each other's comments. So it's a very active and a very collaborative market. I think it's fair to say that imagery plays a hugely important part in attracting the user's attention before they know what the blog is actually about. As I mentioned, this is targeted to top level funnel, so people that are not necessarily familiar with the brand just yet, but also making sure that you use the right keyword. For example, targeting India, we know that people would recognize and would look for motorcycle rather than motorbike. This will help create a seamless transition between other native Facebook posts on their feed and yours. So by creating a native-like experience, you can increase engagement and really boost brand awareness and brand lift, or the number of people that will remember seeing your brand, as the users won't think about your post as, you know, an ad or spam. They will just see it as organic content and they will then engage with it. And the second case study that I just wanted to share with you today is along the same lines in terms of what we're trying to achieve here, but this is just an example of how video can be used to share messages, engage audience, and again, promote your brand and drive traffic back to your website. So in this case, GCAP specializes in tire testing and data collation for the automotive industry. And we found a video was one of the best ways to express, explain, and showcase what they can offer, all compressed into 15 seconds. And because of these are snappy and quick videos that really summarize what they're all about, we saw really good engagement. We managed to reach a very highly targeted and wide audience who would then engage with the post and share it both organically and whether we would put some spend behind it. So similarly to the Amzil case study here, we monitored likes, comments, shares as a sign of engagement, but also views duration for each videos and clicks back to the relevant landing pages on the website as the main KPIs outlining the strategy behind our Facebook posting for these two case studies I've just shown you. So we've seen how social media is a great place to build brand awareness, but I feel social media is also a fantastic space to build relationship and, as we mentioned, trust with your prospects and why not your current customers. So if you're active on social media, and this is whether it's a new market, but these apply to any kind of social media activities that you do, make sure that you engage with your followers, invite them to like your page, but most importantly, address, answer their comments, answer their mention, social media listening, as we call it, is a very powerful tool in engaging your followers. So if you engage with them, they will continue engaging with you. Perfect. So this was a bit of a brief overview of how and why Facebook still remains one of the top performing platforms in a number of markets, India being one of them. And I just want to make sure that we don't forget that there are other ways you can actually promote your brand and business digitally, internationally, and especially in India. And here I'm actually referring and going back to Google as the search engine, as the primary search engine in India, with over 97% of the market share currently. As Susanna mentioned, there is a bit of a fight for the market share, but with 97% at the moment, Google is the platform of choice for many advertisers that are looking to grow the brand and business and exports in India. So a question that we get quite often is, well, why should I bother really setting up separate Google search and display campaign specifically for India? It's like, well, again, going back to Hootsuite most recent report, they really highlighted how search engine in India actually contributes to a third of new brand discovery, and that is a lot. So that plays a huge part on how Indian users research and find new brands and new products. So by being present, making sure your search engine optimization and your search engine marketing are well structured, you can easily be discovered and really start building awareness, which in time, and if with the right tools, would then lead to sales, exports, contacts with local partners, and building that local networks that you need to make sure that your brand grows in this competitive market. There is one thing that I can never emphasize enough. Before you get started with your search engine marketing or any other kind of international marketing, really, make sure you do your keyword research. As we were looking at the breakdown of languages and territories earlier, India actually has the advantage over other big markets. I'm thinking here China or Mexico, for example, of having a high level of English language users. So many Indian users would actually be searching on Google in English. But let's remember that not all English is the same. So I've just provided here a quick example of why doing and periodically reviewing is not enough, unfortunately. Doing it once, reviewing your keyword research is, well, really is key. So here, just a quick example of how American English compares to Indian English. Looking back to the case study with AMSOIL, looking at writing blogs for motorbike enthusiasts, we're looking at, for example, 95% of users in the US will look for gas, whereas in India, if you use the word gas, it would only actually reach 12% of the users. The remaining 88 will be looking for petrol. And this really applies to other simple words you wouldn't really think twice about, motorbike versus motorcycle. Always make sure that you check and you do your research on how your user, your buyer persona you're trying to reach, how are they researching? What words are they using? So here we're talking about the same search engine, we're talking about Google, the same language if you want, it's still English, but keywords can be very different. They can really be the key to a successful campaign in your international market. And this is vital, again, goes without saying, for search advertising. You need to make sure that you're using the same language, and in this case, the exact language that your target audience is using when they're searching for something on Google, if you want to rank high and really be competitive and be found on Google. But this is also paramount for any content you create. So I mentioned blogs, but with content, I also include social media posts. So the short snippet of text that you include at the top of your social media post really is all the audience has, or they have to make a decision, and this could even be unconscious, on whether they will engage with your post or not. So as I mentioned earlier, using native-like language will really help in building that trust, as your content will come through, will feel local, will feel relevant, genuine, really creating some local, as we call LUX, local user experience, which is so important to making sure that you get very high level of engagement. So just to conclude, because I'm quite conscious of time, I've taken up a little bit longer than I was expecting. Just to summarize here before I'll pass you back over to Susanna, imagery and videos are key to high engagement levels. So this will then lead to a higher brand recall. And by this, I mean the level of how many people or how many users you have reached will actually remember your brand, will remember seeing your brand, but also high level of engagement with your landing pages and your website. And always remember, as I said, I cannot stress this often enough, to do your keyword research. Make sure the language you use is what your audience would use, and this creates a localized user experience, really helping you build brand awareness and brand trust.
Joelle, thank you so much. That was a terrific whirlwind tour of social media in India, and some great case studies. Amazing that Facebook's largest single market in the world is India. Before we turn on some questions, and I do see that there's quite a few questions there that I'm very happy to see. My last poll, please. So indulge us here. Does your company already do online marketing? Do you do that? Do you do company online marketing for your domestic market and all of your export markets, or domestic market and just a couple of export markets? Are you thinking about it only for domestic markets? Where are you on this scale? Just a quick, not all of you have responded yet, but just a quick feedback from what we're getting here. I'd say, well, the majority of you, the biggest chunk of you are really just only doing it for your domestic market, which is interesting because 2/3 of you have localized websites, but not 2/3 of you are doing online marketing. So that's something to think about as well. But there are some lucky few who are doing that online marketing for a few export markets, and even some who are doing it for all. Well done. Okay, that was my last poll, and I'm gonna close that poll now, and we're just gonna sort of round up with some sort of takeaways, as we call them, takeaways, and then some questions. So a few takeaways that we have, and I'll get to the questions right after. Thank you very much. Yep. The main takeaway. So India as a whole, very large, 1.3 billion people. 680 of them are online. There's, out of that 1.3 billion people, 78% have mobile phones. And 400 million are very active in social media. And as we said before, that is growing very quickly at 48%. So it is a very engaged market. It's a huge market, and it's still a huge market to come. If internet penetration is 50%, the other 50% is expected to come online too over the next few years. So it is a vast market, and to be found in that huge market, which is so diverse, the best possible tool you have in your armory is definitely a localized website. And why is that? Because like all markets, but especially markets like India, if you want to be found, if you want your buyer persona to find you and then to understand you and trust you enough to do business with you, then you need to have a localized website and international online marketing. Basically, they will search for you online, or they will search for your competitors online if you're not there. When we talk about localization, localization means putting your customer, your buyer persona, your prospect at the center, not on the periphery. So it means really making sure that they are found, that they engage with you the way they want to, that they find you the way they want to. So it's via Google India, it's via Facebook in India, and so on. And that means quite a few different things in terms of your web presence, adapting your localized website for all kinds of things, registering your localized India domain name. All of those things have to come through in order to be recognized by the search engines as having a localized website and localized social media, as Joelle gave some of those examples. Finally, our little slide on sort of India online best practices. We tried to sum it up in sort of 6 takeaways. So first, for us, have a localized website to act as a local springboard 2, know your buyer persona. 3, choose your social media platform, which will give you the best return on your investment. So that means knowing your buyer persona's journey. Set your goals for your strategy, measure them, and look at them all the time, analyze them, tweak them, engage with it. And then obviously just, repeat the process. Go on and repeat the process. So those are our key takeaways really for the India side. There are a lot of resources about India. And on this webinar, you can even take a handout there. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a little icon that says handout, and you can take that and grab it off your screen and drag and drop it, basically. India online environment, which is a summary of the online environment for India for e-commerce, social media, and overall numbers. And then there's lots and lots of other ones. We wanted to do a special call out to both HubSpot and Suite. Then some questions, and we're delighted that there's lots of questions. The very first question I'm going to pass over to Joelle. So Joelle, there's 2 companies actually putting in pretty well the same question. So I'm going to sort of summarize the question, which is that their local in-market partner, in one case a distributor, the other side doesn't say, but a local in-market partner, distributor, does the marketing for them. So the marketing in India is done by a local distributor. Is that a good idea, basically?
Oh, this is a very good question. And I mean, there is no question that distributors or in-market partners, I'm not sure what the second one was, are great assets. They have loads of useful contacts. They know the market inside out. But when it really comes to talking about marketing, you should really consider who should be in control of your online space, of your, what we call, your online real estate, which really converts into who should be in control of how your brand is portrayed and perceived. So my advice in this case would be take your marketing campaigns, your marketing efforts in-house, and really ensure you own your online digital space. Ask your distributors for top tips on the market. They can help you determine your buyer persona, but really should be you that run your marketing campaigns, really to have a bit more control over what's going on out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Distributors are very good at distributing, not always that good at marketing. Indeed. I'm going to take the next question. It's a technical question, which is about domain names. What is the domain name for India? That's an easy one. That is .in for India. And there's a second related question, which is, are there any restrictions to getting a domain name for US companies? No, there are no restrictions. And in general, domain names, to buy them in India, are relatively cheap. The .in is the country code domain name for India. It's operated by the Indian registry. There are no restrictions. I said it's very affordable. So there are 2 ways you can do it. You can either give your name, ABC company .co.in or abccompany.in. We tend to do the .co.in. There tends to be a good take up on that, particularly for B2B companies. But both are good. We have time for just one more question. I know that some of you have put questions in, and we don't have time to answer them all. We will get back to you directly, individually on them. But I'm going to take one other last question, which is an interesting one, I think, about buyer personas. India is a very large, again, I'm summarizing 2 or 3 different questions. India is a very large market. What happens if you have several buyer personas? Indeed, this is something we see in lots of different markets, and indeed with companies who have different verticals and who are marketing to different verticals. You can try and group them together, and Joelle is an expert at trying to make sure that your resources go as far as they can, and you'll find very often that there are similarities, there are overlaps in those buyer personas, and that's the best return on investment when you're looking at your marketing strategy. But otherwise, if they are very divergent, if they're totally different verticals and different industries, then we recommend different strategies, actually. And the vital element to it all, as Joelle said on that side, will be your keyword research. I want to thank Joelle in particular and all of you for attending today. Please, please, please fill out our survey. It happens at the end of this webinar. We have kept it to under an hour, as we promised. We would love you to fill out the survey as well. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye. Have a great and happy exporting.